Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I am joined by Eric Helms and Jeff Alberts as we discuss the intersection of science and experience. This topic stems from the fact that a heavy percentage of the aspiring athletes we get tend to weigh their priorities much different than we would hope, with a pretty blind bias towards external sources of information rather than internal. In other words, why do many first-timers believe that there is the answer in an article? Why do they hear about science and then decide that it's all that matters and everything else is useless? This new wave of quote-unquote evidence-based approaches has almost brainwashed a lot of people in our industry into forgetting how to work with individual athletes to create their own sets of personalized evidence, which can be far more useful than anything you could possibly read or look up. So throughout this talk, despite having very different academic and experiential backgrounds, the three of us are very much in agreement about how dangerously common this misconception is, and we offer some practical solutions on how to get yourself out of this rut. There is direct insight about our personal philosophies on setting baseline data for athletes and how we run the individual experiment from there. We really hope you guys enjoy this discussion, as we feel like it's one of our more useful episodes yet. If you have any feedback or comments on this specific episode, you can leave them for us at 3dmusclejourney.com under podcast number 39. So here it is, guys, the intersection of science and experience with Jeff Alberts and Eric Helms. All right, so this was a conversation that Jeff and I had after one of our other podcasts. He was talking about a really lengthy Skype call, right? It was an athlete that you were doing a Skype with, and it went on a really, really long time because he was asking all the numerical questions that you would find like in a chemistry / I guess a biochem book, rather than worrying about his actual setup as an individual so that you could continue to coach him. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Jeff?
Yeah, it was just a typical overanalyzer that was like, needed to know every little piece of the science. And it was like literally like I was trying to explain to him that we need to set up your structure, you need to run it, and then based on the data that we collect off of that, then we make the revisions necessary to keep your progress going forward. But it was just, it was like everything that I was trying to explain to him what we're doing, he was reverting back to everything he was doing and questioning everything that I was doing, in a sense. Like, it had to have like explanation to every single thing. It was extremely like detailed.
Yeah, like almost like you're saying, here are these principles we're going forward with, and then he's like, but this article and this famous person, and I read this, and
exactly.
I read it. Okay. Happens a lot with first-time Skypes, huh, Eric?
Yeah, this comes down to something that I've addressed, seems like at least once a year in a frustrated post video communication email at some point, and it's the position of people who think they are evidence-based and scientific, using fundamentally unscientific reasoning because they don't actually know what the hell they're talking about. And I'm going to be a little ranty here. But
let's do it. You want to borrow my recliner?
Rant
yeah,
away.
so like you might hear someone say, I don't follow a personal anecdote. When someone says, this works for me, I think that's bullshit. I just go by what the studies say. And believe it or not, that is fundamentally an unscientific way of thinking, because the way science works is that you do a study, you do an experiment, and you see what happens after you hypothesize. You set up a framework, you do something, you see what happens, and then you make your next experiment based on that. And you use a population that represents, or a sample rather, that represents a population you care about. In the context of using science to train an individual, sample and the population are the same thing. The only thing you care about is how the protocol affects the individual. So the personal anecdotes are your data. Now, that said, you can take it too far. Like if someone is really unsystematic in their approach and not very structured, basically the polar opposite of someone like Jeff, because you can tell Jeff does things in a very systematic way. He's very attentive. He runs little mini experiments on himself all the time. If you just have somebody who's like, they do 500 different exercises for chest, right? And they're like, no, I'm pretty sure that the flies got me the upper chest rips. That's not what I'm talking about, right?
Wait, that's not true?
But when you see someone, that's not true. No.
Oh.
Well, it might be for that person. Yeah. So, but yeah, so if we assume the position of the person does, adds one thing in at a time, has a systematic way, takes it away, and compares the difference, and does this over years, that is science in action, and that is exactly what coaching is. So when someone diverts away from the data they have in front of their own eyes on themselves or on a client, and reverts back to a study, that is anti-science. That's incorrect. That's not the way it works. And I think that is something people need to understand, is that science is always within the context of how it applies to the population you care about. And in coaching, that is the individual. And period.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that
reminds me of a Skype I just had 2 days ago, where we were plugging. It was a pull workout, so I was putting in the rows, the pull downs, and all that. And he wanted a rear delt movement, so I'm like, okay, I'll throw one in there. I go, we already got 2 rows in there, 2 pull downs. Your rear delts, I'm sure, are getting plenty of work, but I'll go ahead and throw it in there. He's like, well, in the past, before working with you, I was doing rear face pulls with bands every day, and my rear delts blew up from that. I'm like, well, what else were you doing? You sure it wasn't just the rows and the pull downs as well? How do you know it was the daily band pulls? Because so and so was doing them, and I'm like, well, who's so and so? What research was there behind that? And he's like, no, he just said that's what he did, and I tried it and it worked. I'm like, maybe so. I'm not gonna say it didn't, but I'm saying, how do you know if it wasn't the pull downs, the rows as well? So maybe it's a combination of everything. But he was pretty adamant. It was just like that was the reason why his rear delts blew up.
See, that's excellent. See, the funny thing right now is you have the scientist of the group by trade talking about how anecdote's important, and we have the experienced bodybuilder who's not a scientist talking about how you have to control variables. So I think the idea that it is science versus experience, if you're getting that in your head, probably one of two things are happening. One, you're either very sick of quote-unquote bro science and you want everyone to use evidence-based and you're mad, or two, you are being accused of being a bro scientist and people are attacking your methods because some PubMed study conflicts with what's worked for you, and you're angry. And now you're creating this false dichotomy in your head that it's science versus experience, and posting on Facebook and annoying all people who follow you. That's not actually a reality, though. That's just your emotional reaction. You can tell what's happening here is that there is a way to make educated decisions as an athlete or a coach, and it involves what I would call the scientific method. We may not think of it that way. We just think of logic and common sense. Like what Jeff's talking about is he's saying, hey, you're going to be heavily biased if you just watch some video by insert name of, pro bodybuilder, and he told you this is a great exercise, and then you add it. Then you're going to start you're looking for an effect, and it's going to bias your perception. So you have to have some way of controlling the variables you introduce and having an unbiased measurement, so you actually know what's happening. So earlier when I was saying, hey, personal anecdote when well-controlled, we need to emphasize that well-controlled part. Like when I have data on clients that has 3 years of Excel pages of documents and looking at relationships between their macronutrients and their pictures and their videos and their body weight change, and then changes in volume and strength and volume in different lifts and that interplay. And then I'm asking them questions like, hey, what about this? Or were you doing this? Could this have happened? Etc. to make these decisions. It's not just, yeah, dude, I was doing some band pull downs, noticed my rear delts blew up. Oh, how'd you measure that? Well, when I looked in the mirror, and, anyway, Ben Pilkowski says they're awesome because constant tension, therefore science. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that you have to have a systematic approach, and that is science, even when it flies in the face of what a study says. And I think that might be surprising for some people to hear.
Well, and I think in the most broadest and easy, if you dumb it down to certain questions, it makes it so obvious that you're being crazy. Like, if you only do stuff that a study says, you do realize you could find multiple studies to prove anything, any training methodology. anything you can. So to do something because a study said, I can almost guarantee that you're going to find one or two that say the exact opposite. Would you agree with that, Eric, since you read a whole bunch of studies?
Yes, and if studies were always very, very consistent, we wouldn't need meta-analyses,
right,
where we try to take all the data together and get a very, very strong sample and go right. When we take every study that was done in the last 30 years on this topic, we know there's a moderate effect of doing this, and we can say, hey, for the general, when we collect all our data, we know that doing 10 sets for a muscle group per week gets you more hypertrophy than 7 to 9, which gets you more than like 1 to 5 or whatever. But the point is that's also there is that individual studies have different outcomes. And within individual studies, individual people have different outcomes. So what science tells you is it's basically it's a blunt object. I think I'm stealing a Lane Norton description there, but it's a good one, is that it gets you in the ballpark. And then from there, you have to then work with the data on the individual. And also going back to something you said, Andrea, is principles. Science is much better at establishing principles that are true to everyone, but the details within them are going to be true to only the individual. So I'll give you an example. I'll go back to me talking about how more sets per week tends to have a more or less increasing trend with hypertrophy, right? That is true until you reach a point where it starts to fall off. And there was a study that recently came out on German volume training that found actually less muscle growth in a group doing, I want to say, like 10 by 10 versus 5 by 10, which is interesting. So we know at some point doing too much volume is counterproductive. It eats into more recovery than it's actually stimulating growth, which makes sense. That's true of every adaptation. It's just the gas principle, right? So anyway, if we know that there is eventually a bell curve in how much volume you do, that principle holds true for everyone. There's not some random person who does 1 set, they grow more, 2 set, they grow even more, 3 set, they grow more, 4, no change, 5, they go down, 6, it's even worse, 7, they get huge. That doesn't happen, right? Right? So we know that the bell curve kind of idea is true for everyone. However, we know that for someone like Jeff, based on his years and years of experience, he has a downshifted bell curve. So there's a point where he is going to get a maximum stimulus from volume, and it's probably, in fact, I know it's lower than me or Berto, who tend to respond very well to high-frequency, high-volume routines. While Jeff, on the other hand, he does a high-frequency, high-volume routine for him and responds well, but if I was to do that same amount of relative volume and frequency, I would probably stop progressing because I've done that for years. So it's the same principle holds true, but the numbers are different based on the individual, and I think that's what people really struggle with.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
That's kind of what I talk about when I set protocols up. It's like, because generally I say in most cases that with their younger athletes, they're doing a shit ton of volume and usually not eating enough. So it's like, you talk with them, you establish, okay, they're not really progressing too well. So you establish that and you're like, okay, let me set this first block of training as a base. So I'll tone volume down and just set it up as just like, this is our base. This is where we're going to start from. But it's getting them to buy into going from up here now down to here. Mm-hmm. There's that buy-in. It's a lot of insecurity pops up. I'm not going to progress. But in general, most people respond pretty well to reducing volume when they're coming from a shittier place than they were. Then from there, you collect the data. How did they respond? How do they progress? And then the next block is set up based off the first one. So whether we increase volume or we have to even tone it down even further, it's based on the data we've collected. So that's something I've been really stressing with each person I work with is like, we're going to take, the latest research that Helms put out or whatever, or Alan Aragon or whoever these guys put this stuff out. We're going to use what we can, but we're going to start collecting your own data. And a lot of times, if they're we're setting up macros or whatever, I'm not going to, okay, you're going to have your training days are going to be high days or your non-training or low days, because I want things to be as consistent as possible from the get-go so I can determine the baselines. And from there, it's like, okay, if we're going to say, let's say we're trying to increase calories for a lean gaining phase, I'm only going to do maybe one macro at a time, just so I can see that's the only thing we're changing. Mm-hmm. And then you can see the response from it. So that's basically how I've been really emphasizing each person for a while now. It's like, okay, this is just a baseline we're setting up, and from here we're collecting data.
Yeah, and that is science. versus reading a paper that you don't understand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of armchair evidence-based science people out there, and I don't mean this disparagingly, because I was this person before I understood the principles behind science more, who figure out they're searching for optimal, right? So they figure out all the things that are better than something else and that are supposedly the best knowledge we have at the time, and then they do them all simultaneously, or they try to, because they're not driven necessarily by a scientific principle of controlling for variables, experimenting, and finding out the results. They're driven by a fear that they're not getting the most out of it they can, or impatience that if they just get they're basically treating science like a supplement ad. Like, if I do all the things that my science guru says, then I will get that 20 inches on my arm by next week. And in their attempt to follow science, they end up subverting the basic scientific principles that hopefully, or I guess if we're not doing our job as scientists, should be teaching them before the actual scientific outcomes. And Jeff struck on one of the most fundamental aspects of controlling for confounding variables, right? So I will often go with something that I know probably won't be optimal, but it's because it's consistent and it's controllable, and I can know what's going to happen. Like Jeff said, I might only increase one macronutrient to see how they respond to that. Or, for example, I think that one lift isn't progressing because there's not enough volume on it. And instead of increasing volume on everything, I just do it on that one, even though originally I'd planned on, we're just going to generally increase volume. But I want to see if that's just that one lift that's the issue, or is there some kind of, issue with the way I structure the programming and there's overlap or what have you. I will very often just change one thing. Unless I'm on a time crunch. So, for example, if I've got someone who's 6 weeks out and we're behind, I will take the shotgun approach. I will do everything, because at that point, in time, it's more important for me to get that person on stage shredded rather than figure out what's best for their body. So that might not be the best decision for next season, but this person's going to get on stage in 6 weeks. So sometimes you have to, sacrifice that mindset for the context of the situation.
Yeah, and I know that Jeff, and I get it a little bit, but probably not as often as Jeff, because I know that in, like, say, the general public's mind, Eric is the science guy and Jeff's the experience guy, which is why I'm so happy that y'all are the two people on this, right? But people constantly wanting numbers in Skypes, like wanting to know the best amounts of things. I might get someone who's signing up for prep and they know that they have like 30, 40, and 40 percentage-based diet. And is that better than like a 25, you know what I mean? And it's like, and I was there too, I was like, oh, the reason that I'm not lean enough is because I need 20 more grams of carbs and 5 less fat. Like, that's why. Like, I've been there at a point in my life, but, it's like Jeff said, there's really just some numbers that give us good guesses for literally week 1. And then it literally is just this person's own experiment, right? Time after time. But I think where people get scared is that, or I think maybe they forget that if we're on weekly coaching, like, you're never going to do anything bad enough that this is a disaster, right? When Jeff's like, here's 8 weeks, it's not like they're going to come back in 8 weeks, 30 pounds heavier and 80% like flabbier, It'd
be impressive if they did.
It would be, but it's just believing in
hearing too well if that's the case.
No, that's what I'm saying though. It's like they don't believe that, like, this is based on some really sound stuff, and if you just follow it to take the time to get a baseline, whether that's 2 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, like, the baseline is the key to all of it. The baseline starts your own experiment for like decades, but if you never do the baseline and you're always, again, like, flip-flopping macros or changing programs every 4 weeks or whatever, like, you've never had it, so you never begin your data collection, I guess.
Yeah.
I just said everything y'all said in a different way. My bad.
But it's very useful. You're saying that, when you don't have data collected on someone, you just have to kind of start somewhere and establish a baseline. And I think that's where science is actually very useful.
Yeah.
Let's take a scenario where we don't have science, where the data a new coach would have, I'll say new coach on purpose, would be, I trained myself. I know this is what worked for me. And this is very common, is that they will start with something very similar to what they did for themselves with the person, and that is their baseline. If they're smart, they know that's the baseline and they change it. If they're dumb, they think that's the answer. And if it doesn't work, something's wrong with that person and they're not adhering to it.
Yeah.
That's not a bad place to start from. That's what the person has, right? Mm-hmm. And another version of that would be, this is what all of the pros do, right? And then again, there's a dumb and a smart version of that. Either this dumb version is, well, it works for the pros, it doesn't work for you, you don't have the willpower, or there's the, okay, well, that was our baseline and we moved from there. In each case, it's the same philosophy. You start with a baseline. Science, I just think, is probably a slightly better starting point, right? Instead of working with an N of 1, the sample size of either just you or a sample size of the genetic elite on drugs, or maybe not, maybe you're looking at natural pros, I mean just the genetic elite, there's a much higher probability that you don't represent the average person who's more likely to fall into your lap as a coach, or that the genetic elite don't match the average person. So when you start with either your own personal anecdote, unless you're the perfect normal person, or whether the person you happen to have fall in your lap happens to be just like you or just like the pros, then you're probably going to be off. However, if you do something like I try to do, and like I encourage most coaches, is to start with a range that represents the norm, then you're probably going to be in the ballpark almost every time. And the times you are off, it's because you have a very outlier client. And you might know that going into it because they've probably been frustrated for a very long time. So you can get some kind of indication on how to get closer and closer. But people still don't get that. Like, I can't tell you how many times someone will see my pyramid and they don't think about the structure of the pyramid. They think about the individual numbers as the important part. And I'm trying to teach them that things have different priorities and you have to start from somewhere with some kind of principle-based approach. And they'll see, okay, I need to do 2 to 3 times a week, 40 to 70 reps per body part. And they're like, so what's better? 2 times a week, 40 reps per body part, or 3 times a week, 70? And I'm like, God damn it, it's a range for a reason. You know, the whole point of the pyramid is to get you out of black and white thinking, and you're trying to turn it into a black and white thing. Yeah. So I think that's really the value of science. It's not that it gives you the answers, it gets you closer to what might be the answer for the person when you start and develop that baseline.
Yeah, and then coaching is week after week feedback loops based on like mini experiments every week is how I don't think of it literally that way, but like that is what it is, right? Like we said, I can't, when every time that a change is made that a client's like, oh, really? And it's like, dude, you're going to be back in a week. We're not, this isn't going to be, your body doesn't just blow up overnight or shrink overnight. Like we're doing this one thing and we'll talk about it next week, you know? And I feel like, and I'm sure y'all would agree, a lot of our job as coaches isn't, did I read the article that came out last week? It is, I'm looking at these numbers for this human. How does this human feel? And is this better or less than last week? And is it in accordance with the plan that we set for ourselves? Like it's a whole different set of questions. I literally, this might be dangerous to me to say, I never, when something isn't happening, I can honestly say I've never looked for a study to fix it. It's more looking back in the person's log to fix it. Would y'all agree with that? Not Helms would.
For me, it's probably
if there's
90-10.
Yeah, like if there's a 5-week.
Let's look at the history.
Yeah.
But if there's no history, and if it's like something that's beyond my knowledge, then I'm like, hey Eric, I got this. What do you think?
Well, I guess I should. Okay, see, I knew I shouldn't have said that. Not never, but honestly, currently, I think there's been 2 or 3 occasions in my last year and a half where something's been a problem for like longer than a month, and I come to you guys, and it honestly, in my last year and a half of coaching, hasn't been because of some scientific loophole that I missed. It was because I needed to approach this person different to help them with adherence or make them realize this wasn't the time for them to prep or whatever. It hasn't been like, shit, they were doing they're doing 3 grams of creatine instead of 5. Like that's never been, you know what I mean? Like that's never been the problem.
If you think about it, based on what the nature of science is and what we were talking about earlier, is that it wouldn't be the solution to some tiny problem with an individual. If science is talking about the mean of large groups of people who are semi-similar to the person we're coaching, that only tells us broad principles. Very rarely is science used to answer very individual specific things. It is sometimes, and those are useful, but it's nuanced science rather than principle-based science, which is more of what we're talking about when we get into the general area. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some times where that kind of thing on a very specific topic can be helpful. The thing that's popping in my head right now is if you know someone has PCOS, then you would probably and you found that out midway through your coaching, you'd be like, oh shit, well, I've had this person on a high carb, low fat approach, and they're really struggling. Now that might be why, and I can try to manipulate their macronutrient intake. And there's no reason why the average coach would know that unless it's out there. So there are times where you have a nuanced kind of outlier outside of the norm thing where it's good to have someone on board, which is the role I play with 3DMJ, who has read a bunch of shit that they'll only need once every 3 years to help when those occurrences happen.
Yeah.
And it's important. I think when we've got a coaching staff of 5 people, and on average each one of us is working with more than 20 people, so we've got like 100 clients at a time, there's a high probability that once a prep season, someone's going to ask me and say, "Hey, Eric, what's up with this?" and I can be useful. But it's certainly not a day-to-day thing. It's not like I have to use EndNote and citation software when I give coaching adjustments, like we're going to drop 10 grams of carbs because Stewart et al. 2013 or anything like that.
Yeah, but I feel like that's what a lot of people think we do. You know what I mean?
I think it's what they think I do. Yeah.
No, I think that's what they think I do.
Well, you do have a master's degree.
I do have a master's degree.
They don't think I do that. I know that.
Well, no, like when I tell someone that I'm
you ain't losing weight. We're dropping some food. All right, there we go.
Well, when I tell someone that I'm a bodybuilding coach, like in the gym, like say they find out I'm at Gold's or whatever, and the first thing is to ask about, first thing still is supplements, which makes me sad, and then what supplements they should be taking. And then the second thing is like, if they're semi-savvy, it's the either training volume, like their program that they're on, which is usually has a name, so it's like Wendler's or Shaker, or if they're, or it's so-and-so's 12-week on bodybuilding.com, which still is not really a bad start if they would actually stick to it and cause it and use it as data and move on forward. But anyways,
structure.
Exactly.
Structure there.
And then it's if they're, or they'll ask me about macros, because that's like now semi-common knowledge. Yeah, but usually it's like a college kid that's going out and having, like they keep it tight during the week and then have no fucking idea what they're doing on the weekends. So then again, it's not a very good experiment. Warrior diet. Yeah. So it's just the wrong questions. But when you say that you're a bodybuilding coach, I feel like I get asked to number things a lot, numbers and brands, right? And programs, as opposed to people understanding that coaching is. Again,
well,
I've talked about it tons.
And often too, they want the answer
yes.
ahead of time. Like,
and
I want
you've
the
never
answer
met them, but they want to know what you think about them.
They want it now, and you don't know anything about them. But even on Skype, you don't have the first time meeting with someone, you don't have the answer now.
Yeah.
Like you have, like was Eric saying, we can use science, let's set it up, but now we got to run it. But that's what you get a lot, is that everybody wants the answer now, and it's impossible. Like for me, I like telling you, Andrew, in the past conversation, where after 31 years of training, I have a shit ton of answers now,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need to rely on science as heavily as maybe if I was starting in my first year, because I don't have no answers. I'm looking externally for it, so I'm going to look to coaches or to science for the answers. But as you travel along the journey, that pendulum starts to swing. Instead of looking externally, you start to look more internally, because now you got all this experience and all this personal data that you can rely on to help guide you into the future. So that's kind of what I do now with my training, with the way I have to train now, with the little aches, pains, injuries. Like I have all this collected data on myself.
Yeah.
All the training programs that I've had over the last 3-4 years, they're still in my spreadsheets. I can look at them and say, okay, I tweaked my back here. What was I running there? Okay, this was low reps. I was training legs twice per week. Probably was doing that for a little too long. So things like that, I could look at it and use to help better myself in the future. So I think, like, if someone starting out, you need to understand that you need to be okay with not knowing, because you're going to learn as you go. And
you still don't know the perfect program for you. Would you agree, Jeff? It's always could get better.
It's always evolving.
And by better, just more personally in line with you based on the data. Like there's obviously leaps and bounds we can get better to start your first decade or whatever. And then with Jeff, it's like better is like the 1% every year kind of thing.
Well, it's like this week has been better than last week. I had to change my programming based on how I was feeling last week because I was all beat up.
And you know
so
what?
I've changed around some exercises and took an extra rest day in there, and I'm like, okay, I'm starting to feel a lot better now. Whereas in like my first month or 2 months, 6 months, a year of training, I might not have that experience to do that correctly.
And you wouldn't even I say a data point too is you knowing what beat up feels like. There's a difference between I'm sleepy. There's a difference between I'm stressed out because of external things versus this is not the right amount of training for me right now. Like, how those different things feel. And
I know how to auto-regulate for the most part, yeah.
Yeah. And most people coming in for the first time are just so frazzled and don't know what to do that they're just reading articles.
So it's like if you're starting to train, set up a structure, and then it could be very simple and run it and give it time. Don't program hop. Give it actually some time to see how things go, collect the data on it, log your training, log your nutrition. Like you keep logs, then that's how you get better because you could look at your own data.
Yeah. And I
think.
Go ahead.
I got a lot to say, so you better
do it. No, get on it. Get on it.
All right.
So I'm gonna drink out of my.
What is that? Big ass mug of get shit done.
The GSD mug. I love it.
Go ahead. I need the drink. Go ahead.
Okay, do it, Eric. Go.
All right. I think probably the biggest favor you can do yourself if you're relatively new in the sport, or even someone who's relatively experienced in the sport but still very romantic with the way kind of the bodybuilding mentality is to let go of the idea that there is a shining golden answer. There is the ideal, there is the optimal, that there is the super program, there is the super nutrition program, and even not even just in general that it's there for everyone, but even that it's there for you.
Yeah.
Because what is ideal for you is going to change always. And you can tell how so fundamentally ingrained this desire for there to be a golden answer to everything is, because even when I tell people I study autoregulation, which is basically the study of saying there is no golden rule and that maybe it's better to modify things based on how things are going, they go, oh, that's the golden rule. Like autoregulation is the dope program. And it's like, you're still stuck in this mentality. You still think that everything is a supplement, and the supplement industry, it drives this, rather they hook into it. They realize that everyone is looking for this super magical thing.
Can I throw something in there? Keep your thoughts though.
Okay.
Not just supplements, but like YouTube and all the social media that says bro splits, science splits. Like there's always this or that. You know what I mean? It's like 1 week I ran a 3-day split. Like I think I ran like a week or two. It was hitting one body part each once per week. I needed that recovery, So it's like, okay, I went bro for a week. And then I went back to, okay, let me up my volume, up my frequency when I was feeling better. So there's, like you're saying, this is not like a black or white. And I think when people will put out like bro splits, this split, that split versus this versus that, that's what it helps to drive the mentality, especially with someone who's maybe just now getting into the sport. That's how it gets ingrained. In my opinion, that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's natural to want something now and to be excited about it and be passionate and want the answer for you because that's nice, and it's also natural to want to make things extremely simple and to break them down into either good or bad. It's easier to do that morally. It's easier to do that in terms of decision making. You can see our news does that to us. You can see that we do that to ourselves with our fitness icons. However, the key to anyone's success in any field is critical thinking. And the antithesis to critical thinking, the ability to think critically, that wasn't a very good description of critical thinking, is black or white thinking. If you try to reduce everything to either good or bad, in situations where there's not a yes or no answer, you're doing a tremendous disservice to yourself, and you will forever be stuck in the mentality of trying to figure out what the best thing is, instead of understanding that things are not mutually exclusive, that one thing may be better at a different time, and that even two things where one might be better than the other, it might only be marginally better, and you're asking the wrong question in the first place, and you should actually be looking somewhere else completely. So, yeah, I think that, like I said when I started this semi-rant, was that the best thing you can do for yourself is let go of the idea that there's a perfect program or nutrition plan for you, and realize that it will constantly change and you're never going to get it right. And to understand that all of the little things you're concerned about, each one of them has only a very small influence. And that's why, like when I talk about the pyramid, the most important structure is the hierarchy, not the numbers inside of it. If you can understand things like that and get out of your black and white mindset, then you will be able to use science and experience in a much more effective way and understand how they're basically the same thing when done right.
Mic drop. Okay, see you later.
Word.
Just kidding.
That kind of reminds me when I was stuck with the Dorian Yates Mincer hit. Like that was it. That was it for me. That was the program. It was black and white. And then whenever someone would try to say, "Hey Jeff, what about this?" or "Hey, try this," it was like, no. It was like a defense mechanism, because that's how I identified myself through that training style. Like, no, I'm hardcore. I take it to failure. And hey, Eric knows. When he first met me, that's what I was doing. So it's like slowly but surely, like, changed my way of thinking. And it's like, I could look back in 2009 compared to now, and I'm like, I'm far better bodybuilder, far more superior, because of the mentality, not the physicality part of it.
Isn't that weird that things will defend, though? Like, you were convinced.
That's so important.
Yeah, and go ahead.
And the key is there that, and you're probably going to say the same thing, is that, and Jeff pointed out, he identified with it. It became a part of his identity. And I think what is very common for us, because we're social creatures, and we're here because we can survive, and we survive by creating a safe environment, is that our worldview and our self-identity are things we protect irrationally, and so the trick is to evaluate whether or not the things you're turning into your worldview and your identity are actually things that should be turned into your worldview or identity. Like we'll see these people who are like, we call them like paleotards or hit-tards, or no offense to these things. I actually don't think there's a huge lot wrong with HIIT if done right, and a paleo diet can be very useful if you also understand macronutrients and calories. It's a very satiating diet, high in protein, right, and high in vegetables and fruit. Anyway, the point being is that when you start to make a approach part of your worldview or your self-identity, you're going to be loath to identify its flaws, and that means you're going to be preventing yourself from progressing in new ways. So, yeah, I understand the need to be part of a community. One of the workarounds for this is you create a self-identity around being objective, right? I'm a skeptic. I'm an objectivist. That's a nice way of using your own flawed human natural way of thinking to trick yourself into not thinking like a human, which is funny. That means your self-identity is that you don't make a self-identity out of things, So that's kind of the way I think I trick myself to not let my ego get in the way, and to be able to evaluate new information, and why I'm not, when I find out that, maybe my hypothesis about protein wasn't as rock solid as it was, and I'm not like, no, protein, we need protein, kind of thing.
Yeah. So. Well, and it's you should, I would argue that you should almost hope that you are wrong about a lot of things over and over, because then you are getting better. Right, you're using the data to go forward. Like, there's a lot of shit we all said in this in this conversation so far that we used to, and if we were super closed-minded, we still would be,
Yes, yeah.
And that's the best part of it, is like, if you are a closed-minded, I'm always right, the science said, blah blah, then because science is going to evolve. So how are you supposed to stay married to these articles now when in 5 years they will be the obsolete articles?
Yeah, science has a funny way of frustrating people, because people who have very highly ordered minds, and they like structure and an analytical approach to life, are drawn to science because it gives quantitative answers, right? What they don't like about science is that its inherent limitations is that it can give quantitative answers based on the data it has, and based on the assumptions and what you know to control when you do go into the study, means that it will constantly correct itself. And what you thought was correct 10 years ago might be flat out wrong, but more likely at least will be partially wrong and be modified. So they're drawn to science, and then they get frustrated by the fact that it can't give you the answer because there is not the answer. So it is, and which is where scientists get in trouble a lot. They like to. Scientists are very smart people, but they still want to think in black and white terms. They want to give you a quantitative answer, and it's nice when we can. But if you look at the way good statistics are set up, they don't give you just one number. They almost always give you a number with a probability attached to it, or they give you a number with a range of confidence on it. And you can see the creep of that intellectual desire for black and white numbers even come into statistics. Like, for example, and I'm not going to go too hardcore in statistics, the most common way that we say we have confidence in an outcome is with what's called a p-value. And there's p equals and a number. And that number is basically the percentage chance that it happened due to chance, right? So I can say, hey, higher protein results in greater muscle, p equals 0.04. That means there's a 4% chance that the group that got more muscle just happened because of random stuff unrelated to protein, right? And now let's say, and now here's where the scientific creep of intellectual incorrectness comes into it, and that desire to have black and white answers. If that p-value was high enough, and I couldn't know that it was, or it wasn't a low enough percentage for me to confidently say, more than likely protein is better than low protein, someone would say, oh, there's no difference between low protein and high protein. That's a black and white answer. The p-value doesn't say there's no difference. It says there is a difference, but there's a 50% chance, if it's p equals 0.5, there's a 50% chance that it was due to random variation. There's still a difference, though. Unless the p-value is 1, which you never see, it's not the same data set. There's a difference. It's just whether there's a high probability of there being a difference and to what magnitude. So even scientists don't like the fact that you can't have clear-cut black and white answers, and there's inherent levels of probability and ranges rather than black and white answers. So it's not just something that smart people think critically and dumb people think in black and white. It's like, no, this is something you have to constantly check yourself on, and you have to practice and develop discipline around thinking in non-black and white terms, because it's exactly where you'll slip to. That's a lot of the reason, and this is a total tangent, like people who get depressed, they get overwhelmed intellectually and start thinking more and more in black and white terms. And that's when suicide becomes an option to them, because either life is terrible or it's good.
Either or.
And exactly. And they get to a point where there's no way they can possibly see it being good or changing. So I'm out, and that's something that they've done a lot of research on, is you kind of get dumber when you get depressed and you lose options. And then you make the mistake you can't come back from. So you have to really, really be self-aware in order to maintain that kind of critical thinking to make smart decisions. And I think it's something that most people don't know to even try to be aware of.
Yeah. And I think, too, what's funny is you brought up, like, okay, p-values. I can guarantee 90%, I shouldn't be, here I go being a black and white, right? I'm making up a 90% of a population that, doesn't even exist. A lot of people is what I meant to say. A lot of people who go to PubMed for the first time, and they're just like, abstract, number, and it's like, but if you read any discussion, any properly written, which we hope would be most of them, that is the point in the article where they should be pretty much telling you, but it could be all these other things, And it's funny how many people read the first sentence of an abstract and I feel like throw articles around, like the title or somewhere in the abstract, and that's just flying around Facebook everywhere. And I'm like, but did you finish it? First off, also, maybe it's like you had to pay to access it. And I'm like, there's no way you even read this. So get this out of here. You know what I mean? Like, you don't go to a university and it's behind a paywall and the whole rest of it doesn't say that. So it's title.
Yeah, people tend to state with more confidence in the researchers themselves the findings that came out in the study, which should give you pause. If they're like, it may be in this situation that there's a high probability that this might be better than that, and you're like, see, I told you high carb diets are the best. Then that's like, That's not what the scientists said. Do you think you know how to interpret their results better than them? Sometimes you might. Maybe they made a critical flaw, or maybe that was a study 10 years ago and you have, 10 other studies that are more recent to add that too. But if you're looking at, just one study and that's all the information you have, and you're, have a whole lot more hyperbole than the person who wrote it, maybe you should take a step back and evaluate whether or not your biases are creeping into the way you're presenting that information.
Yeah. And as
I have to step back with all the Facebook conversations and all those. I don't get involved in any of them anymore because it's just like that mentality is like it's either you're wrong, I'm right, and I don't know. From my experience over the 31 years, there hasn't been a clear-cut answer to anything. I thought there was back in the day, but it turned out, oh shit, I was really wrong, and everything keeps evolving. And the way I do things is different, and the way my athletes do things is always different at certain points. And there's a lot of context involved in all kinds of different situations.
Well, look what happens in
like you, Eric. You'll get into some conversations. You're in there for like hours. I'm like, holy crap! How does he sitting there for hours? Because that's what it takes for you to make it clear. Like, you have to get in there and actually engage in a thorough conversation to get people to fully understand.
And they might not.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's true. But the thing, and I take the Alan Aragon approach of, hey, the person you're talking to might not get it, but there may be 10, 20, 30, however many followers you have who see that, and that clicks and they go, oh, it's not black and white, So I think it's hard, but it comes at an emotional cost, I can think of many conversations I've had lately where I'm like, God damn it, like this is so annoying. I don't want to explain this for the 100th time. This person is angering me, but I stay cordial. I'm respectful. I don't let my emotions get the best of me, and I try to help them understand that it's not a black and white answer and why, and hopefully they get it. Worst case scenario, they don't and they stay mad and we agree to disagree. But I think in my head, there's got to be at least a few people who saw that and understood something from it. But I know for those of you who don't really see, I'd be surprised. I don't think there's many people who really think that black and white thinking is actually a good thing. But just look at elements in society where we only have two choices and how bad that's turned out and how it's turned people into cruel. And on one specific topic, all of a sudden, they don't have charity and they think the other person is evil and that they're good. I mean, look at the two-party system in America. I would say that every 4 years, all of a sudden, people who've been getting along for 3.5 years on Facebook start treating one another like they're the devil because they find out they have, they're the ones on the blue team, ones on the red team. And I think the way that system is creates that mentality. There's no one to look up to who takes a truly, not just a farce at certain times, stance that there really shouldn't just be two options, and that there isn't just 2 points of view, that there are, as many different points of view as there are people on the planet. So, yeah, any time we are presented with a limited number of choices, it forces you to make a less than optimal choice.
Yeah, and speaking of optimal too, I don't think we've talked about it yet in this one, probably in other ones, would be the fact that if you do have science to back up, or even the personal physical data to back up that one option might be better for your physical progress than another, right? At some times, though, there could be opinion and preference that matter more than either of those. Exactly. Like if I, we talked about like some maybe more black or white things would be, not more black or white, less gray would be like a schedule, or the kids I have to pick up at this time, so I can't train these days because blah. But it might be like, if I'm having more fun with this one and I like it, and it's pushing the volume limit and I know it, coach, but I feel better, I have more energy, I put more effort into it, then if it might be the better option. Example that we talked about in the cardio one, like some people just need to get that shit out or they go like a little bit crazy. Okay, well then you can run once a week. I don't recommend it it's not going to kill you. Okay, fine. That's going to be better, even though I would prefer our data would be more reliable without it. But if you're a happier human because of it, then that might put you in the sport longer or whatever, then cool.
Yeah, I just had an athlete that it was the approach, basically. The goal for the athlete was to get, is not a prep athlete, just someone who wants to get leaner. But I was wanting to take a more of a big picture approach. Okay, let's build your food up, your performances. Let's get your performance in the weight room up. Then once we get you set up with more food, better performance, then we'll, take the food back down and cut. And okay, coach, and he said, well, I really want to be lean, but I'm going to go ahead and buy in, and we're going to do it. Okay, so as we're going through the process, every week performance was everything was going well. Like my game plan was going well, performance is going up, food's coming up, body weight staying pretty stable, not really gaining too much weight, maybe a pound over, actually lost a couple pounds in the first couple weeks, but then it kind of come back up. But he was just every week very anxious because it wasn't going towards his goal, which was fat loss. So it was every week he kept, letting me know. But I would explain again, try to say, okay, no, but this is the reason why we want to take the big picture approach. And he would say, okay, we'll keep going. Finally, he's just gave me a long video and said, Coach, I am just not happy. And my heart sank. I felt so bad. I feel oh man, I've been doing this for this guy for close to 2 months now. Everything is going well, but in his mind, it's not what he wanted. So eventually I'm like, you know what? Okay, let's just cut. So I was okay, now it's time to make him happy. So I compromised. Okay, let's go ahead and do a cut. So sometimes you have to do things that maybe, in your mind is probably not the best decision, but if it makes someone happy and it's not detrimental to their health, then why not?
Yeah.
I think that comes down to...
And I'm monitoring them too. So it's I'm monitoring weekly. So it's not it's oh yeah, you're on your own now, you're cutting. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really interesting topic because it comes down to acknowledging that you're coaching humans, right? So what might be best on paper by your best estimation as a coach doesn't take into respect what they want or what they think, I mean, we might start with what are your goals and here's the best way to get them, but
we start
sometimes, right? Yeah. So sometimes with their personal preferences, if they're a well-balanced individual who's pretty self-aware, if you go with their desires and their adherence and their personal preference, that ends up being optimal. Because even if something on paper might have been slightly better scientifically, their enjoyment and their adherence and their sustainability of the program would be better, which in the big picture would be better if you just went with what was slightly less optimal, but they would adhere to it and be sustainable. On the flip side of the coin, though, not all bodybuilders are mentally stable, self-aware people.
Really?
And it's not just bodybuilders. Not all people are mentally aware, and so it's a delicate balance as a coach. And I've certainly been in situations where I've done that. The person's like, hey, coach, I really just love to do squats, even though I get hip pain from it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's work them in once a week. And I think you should just do a leg press or, whatever. I can think of a million examples where I do something because I know it'll get them excited and that'll be better in the long run, but there's something about it that probably wouldn't be best. And if they were just a pure logical machine, they wouldn't do it, but they're not. And they will never will be. So it's almost pointless to try to force them to try to do it. That's actually suboptimal. But on the flip side of it, and I'll use probably the most common example I can think of, is people who want to maintain being very lean year round. You can only give them what they want so long. So it's one of those things where the physiological reality is that they're not going to be happy. They're going to be food focused. They won't even be able to gain muscle, and it's going to have temporary and acute, negative health effects of trying to not having any libido and being slightly more depressed and having sleep disturbances, of trying to maintain leanness all year round.
That's what the initial problem was, that what I was trying to get them away from. So it's you build this food up, correct all these things, and then when you're in a better stable position, then let's cut when you're a little bit more in a better environment. So, and
I've experienced that as an ongoing negotiation. So sometimes you're going to lose them if you just don't give it all, and sometimes they need to see that this is an unsustainable approach, right? So normally what I end up doing is I'm telling the person, hey, we can try this, I don't think it's going to go very well. I don't want to negatively bias you, but you need to think about if we get there and in 2 months you're killing yourself to maintain it, and you're struggling with your happiness, like you've achieved your goal, but it's so difficult it's not worth it, then the only thing that you can change is internal. You have to start thinking about, is this really the aesthetic ideal I want? Is it realistic to be shredded all the time? And is that actually getting what I want? Because you don't want to just be shredded because you like the aesthetic look of abs. You think being shredded is going to result in something, which is typically your happiness. So when you get the thing that you think is going to make you happy and yet it makes you unhappy long term and it's unsustainable, then the only logical thing to do is to reassess whether that is truly what your values are. And that's hard to do, which is why you can't just force it on them in the front end. They have to kind of experience that. And
that's why I get in. I'm like, okay, I got to make him happy. But eventually, like as we go through this, that's the question. The question will be, we can get you leaner. Then the question becomes, is it sustainable? That raises a whole new set of questions.
Yeah.
And I think if sometimes you have to let people go through the actual process so they can experience for themselves. Because if you just tell them, like Eric's saying on the front end, they hear someone like more experienced telling you that, but sometimes it just takes you to go actually through something to really for it to stick and to accept it.
I'm 100% that way. You can tell me and I can read the books and I can whatever, but I'm like, I'll figure this out. Just fucking wait. You did that with me. You do that to me all the time, Jeff. You're like, I knew you couldn't do that forever. Jeff's done that with me. Berto's done that with me. Like Cairo's done and I know it makes sense, but I know I'm that person. I'm happy nobody gives up on me. And what you said, Eric, when you're like, or we'll lose them. And I don't want people to think that that's because coaching money. It's because we know that we can help them better than if they were on their own continuing that shit for years.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
I don't even want more clients. So yeah, I mean.
No, but I know how you're like, we want to keep them, but I think it's really important that.
No, that's easy.
It's because we give a shit.
We don't want to lose them because it's money. But no, when I say lose them, I mean lose their buy-in. And then they go, okay, that was nice. Thanks, coach. No, thanks. I'm going to go somewhere else. And they just coach hop until they find someone who they will pay to do whatever they want.
And the protocols
I say
like crazy, dangerous or whatever. Yeah. I'd rather control, like, if it's a protocol I'm not really, like, comfortable giving, but at least I know it's not going to be detrimental. I'm not going to, like, kill that person.
Well, it's a stair step, right? It's a step, like, if they're here, and in our experience, a really good, productive sound thing would be here, but if we took them there, they lose their shit, so we can go here for now, you know?
Right.
Like,
yeah, they would say, I don't want to work with you anymore, and they would go all the way to the dumb thing without any control from us. So, and I think it's not a bad quality to be the person who needs to experience it. Like you, Andrea, I think that the problem is when that quality is mixed with someone who doesn't have critical thinking or any self-awareness, and has no ability to analyze that, logically it doesn't make sense, but I really got to try it out. Because that's when people get in a lot of trouble, is when they won't listen to anyone else, and they have to experience it on their own. So that means the thing they're going to try is not even in the realm of reasonable. Like the things you do, it's like, you're kind of pushing it, but I know you need to do it. You're not going to explode. Yeah. But other people, other people with that same mindset, without the critical thinking behind it, they're the ones who do something like a 12-day fast and then end up in the hospital. Because you guarantee you that person talked to their coworker, like, I'm going to do lemon juice only for 12 days. And everyone's like, Tammy, I think that's really a bad idea. Or, John, don't do that. But they're like, no. I really think this is going to work. Those are the people who get in trouble, Yeah. So. Sorry.
I know someone who recently did a fast, and it makes me giggle on the insides.
Well, I actually recently just, for a colleague, I answered a question about this, and I linked a article about someone who actually died during a 12-day fast. And that just popped in my head. I was like, someone said something to her. Like, on day of 10, she must have been looking bad,
Yeah.
And that's not to say that many people haven't done it successfully either. But it's just generally not, again, which is kind of all what we're talking about, is that's the best we can do. But if like 99% of the normal people don't do it, then...
So instead of contrasting or making it a versus of experience versus science, really The question is, what is the optimal way to use both to get the best results on yourself or as a coach with your clients? And I would say science is the best tool we have to start in the ballpark. So you would start somewhere within the realm of what you think makes sense for that person in terms of setting up their volume or setting up their calorie intake or setting up their macros. And then from there, that's when you have to rely pretty much on individual data. And rarely are you going to be looking outside of that if you're doing your job right, unless some new information comes into light, which, like the PCOS example I had. So I think it's pretty much what we already said and what Jeff emphasized from the beginning is that, his starting protocol is going to be based on, what makes sense from, a quote unquote empirical perspective. But after that, the only data set that matters is the person itself, herself, him or herself. So
itself, their self, all the selves.
Their self.
Okay.
That person.
That was really good, Eric. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. All right. We'll see y'all next week.
Yeah.
Later.